So I've been reading about France's current race for the presidency for the 2022 election. And so far, it looks like Emmanuel Macron is in first place. Second place is Le Pen and her National Rally Party. And then in third place, you have Eric Zemmour. And Eric Zemmour has been talked about a lot lately because he has just boomed in the polls recently. But today it was reported that he dropped from second place to third place, and now he is trailing Marine Le Pen. Now, Emmanuel Macron, the stereotypical European liberal, he is still in first place. He is still winning in the polls. But nonetheless, the other side is trailing behind him. The Eurosceptics, the people who are anti-NATO, the people who are vehemently against immigration from certain parts of the world, these people are right behind him. So it's not as if the moderate side, the status quo of European politics, is winning. It's not as if the status quo, the establishment, is dominating. It's really that the status quo is holding on to whatever it has left, because the zeitgeist is changing. The political atmosphere of the world is changing. It's changing. It's going more and more towards nationalism and things like isolationism, things like protectionism. This is what is becoming more and more trendy and popular. Eric Zemmour, he is, from what I read about him, and today I just read his Wikipedia page, which is actually really helpful, by the way. If you want to get a basic understanding of something or someone, look it up in Wikipedia and just read it from beginning to end. It's really amazing how much you can learn. And it's always good to have at least a basic understanding of what you're reading about or who you are reading about. And from what I have read about him, Zemmour is a typical provocateur. He is going to say things that trigger people, knowing that they will trigger people. So, for example, he'll say something like, employers should have the right not to hire blacks and Arabs. I mean, obviously saying something like that is going to piss off a lot of people. It's going to trigger people. It's going to anger people. And he knows this. He's not stupid. Zemmour has been in the business of journalism and polemics and provocation since the 1980s, since when he began writing in journalism. So someone who's been writing for that long understands how to anger people. Believe me, I know, because I've been around in blogging and vlogging and article writing long enough to know what to say to rile people up. And he is that type of person. He knows exactly what he needs to say to get attention. And that's something that is actually very effective. There's a saying that there's no such thing as bad publicity. And I will say, for the most part, this is true. Unless, of course, you're revealed to be some kind of psychopath, or, even that is actually becoming popular. Maybe if you're like if you're a complete pervert, then it's not good. Okay, let's just put it that way. But for the most part, that statement is true. There's no such thing as bad publicity. And he is very good at getting attention. If you read his Wikipedia article, it's just paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of Zemmour got fined this amount of money for saying this. Zemmour got convicted for saying this, for inciting racial hatred. And by the way, if you look at all of his convictions, every single one of them so far has been overturned. There's one that's currently pending, but it looks like that's also going to be overturned as well. If you look at the numbers of times that Zemmour has been fined, each and every single time, those were also overturned. So, for example, one time he got fined $10,000 for inciting something, and then, or 10,000 euros, and that got overturned because, according to the court, he has the right to say certain things. He's not attacking an entire people. He's only specifying. I don't remember exactly what was said, but it was like was only specifically criticizing a certain type of person or something like that. They couldn't nail him on racism, in other words. But that's not the point. The point is that this guy is very good at gaining attention. And that is really, I would say, the reason for his success, is gaining that attention by saying things that a lot of people feel. And that is really the point of interest here. What are people feeling? Is everyone on board with the establishment politics of someone like a Macron? Obviously not. And the fact that so many French people are supporting someone like a Le Pen or a Zemmour really tells us that the political atmosphere is shifting towards nationalism, and it's shifting towards breaking away from American power. Now, Zemmour has stated that he is not in favor for a Frexit, or a French exit from the European Union, but he wants more independence from the EU, which is basically one step before just going full Frexit. He specifically wants to be independent of the EU in the realm of immigration. But the fact that he is pushing for this independence from Euro power or EU power really goes to show you that the EU is losing its grip. The current system that the EU entails is losing its grip. A lot of people no longer want to even obey the EU. A huge example of this is in Poland, where the Polish government basically has flipped the bird to Brussels when it comes to the judiciary system in Poland, basically saying we don't really care about what some articles say within EU judicial law. We're going to do our own judicial system. And this is really an indication of a current trend. The EU is losing its grip. So what's going to happen? As this sort of spirit or this sort of sentiment festers and grows and grows and grows, the European Union is going to have to reform itself. Basically, the big dog in the EU, Germany, is going to sink its claws more and more into the reality of its own power. And what I mean by that is that Germany is like the elephant in the room. The most powerful economy in the EU is Germany. So the one that has the most money is going to be the top dog. It's going to be the top power. It's just like the United States. American politicians won't usually say that America runs the world. It's not really something that you hear often coming out of Washington, D.C. But America is the elephant in the room in this case, because it's the biggest economy in the world. America has the most powerful economy. It's the biggest GDP, the most powerful military in the world. And therefore, America runs the world. So in the case of Europe, looking at Europe as just a block of power, Germany is the elephant in the room. So as the facade of Brussels begins to dissipate, or as more and more people begin to disrespect the idea of Brussels having this headquarters for European governance, the Germans will have to really be proactive and assert themselves as the leader of Europe. And I don't want this to happen, because look at what happened in history. Look at what happened in the past. Germany in World War I, Germany in World War II. So this is obviously something that I don't want. But this is just the reality. There has been so much talk coming out of Germany about revitalizing the Bundeswehr, the German armed forces. There's been a lot of talk about increasing the spending for the German armed forces. What is this really about? Why is Germany talking so much about this? There was a document that came out from the German government. I want to say this was back in 2018 or 2017. I don't remember which date. Regardless, this document that came out basically listed a number of possible scenarios that the European Union could end up in. And one of the scenarios is that the EU, as we know it, has crumbled, and the German military has to be active to defend Europe against certain threats. There has to be a proactive military force within Europe to defend the continent. And the fact that the Germans were even talking about this really goes to show us that this whole idea of Europe being this perpetual force of peace within the continent, it's really dying. This idea of Europe just being on the sidelines, Europe not being involved in war, Europe being indifferent to the idea of war, just depending on America, that idea is dying. Even America knows this. The CIA itself stated in it was a document that really came from U.S. intelligence. It was basically on what to expect in the coming decades, and I think it specified the 2030s or 2040s, basically stating that in the future, America is no longer going to be the sole power of the world. The world is going to be broken down into several blocks of power. One of them is going to be Europe, and this document from U.S. intelligence specifies this. And so as that sentiment of let's go against the euro, all these things, as that grows, and as nationalism grows, the Germans are going to have to adapt. They're going to have to adapt to become more nationalistic, become more independent. Because the French, they want to pull away from American power. In fact, Zemmour himself stated that the American invasion of France, starting at Normandy Beach, was a liberation of France from the Germans, but at the same time, it was the beginning of the American occupation of France. Zemmour himself said this. So what type of idea is this? What does this indicate? It indicates to us that a lot of French people see the Americans as occupiers, as people who rule over France, and they want to be independent. And Zemmour has said specifically that France has the ability to be independent because the French have a very strong military, and of course, the French are a nuclear power. And he's correct about that. France does have a very formidable military, and France does have nuclear weapons. Regardless of that, the fact that so many French people want to break away from American power and want to become more independent, it really does reflect a growing sentiment in the political climate of our time. And it's really crazy. It's really crazy. And and as Europeans begin to grow more and more in favor for the idea of breaking away from US power and having a more independent Europe, the more and more that Europe gets more entrenched into that idea, the more the Germans are going to be pushing for the idea of a pan-European military force led by Germany, which would essentially be the new military force of the Fourth Reich, and all these European militaries would be the auxiliaries for the Germans. They'll just be serving Germany. And they may package it in any way they want. They may package it as, oh, this is the pro-Europe military force, where integration is key, but the elephant in the room would be that Germany is running it. Just like Germany controls the finances in Europe, just like Germany controls all of the countries that are in debt slavery to German banks like Greece and Spain and Italy. In fact, when I was in Italy, one guy even told me, I remember, that the Germans control Italy, that Italy is essentially a territory for the Germans, and he was absolutely right. So that is really the bottom line. And what's crazy is that, as this whole nationalism thing grows, you have Catholics who are just jumping on the wagon for this stuff, and they're getting their jollies up for this. In fact, a lot of the people who are working for Zemmour's campaign, or they're pushing, they're promoting Zemmour. A lot of these people are French traditional Catholics. And one thing that I can tell you about French traditional Catholics, from my experience with them, is that a lot of them are fascist, and a lot of them will sympathize with they'll sympathize with the Nazis in France, or they'll sympathize with the Wallonian fascist, and they have some very warped ideas. So really, don't trust any of it. Don't take a side, because at the end of the day, it's all for an insidious agenda. One thing that I have realized over the years is that it doesn't matter which side you pick, liberal or conservative, left-wing or right-wing, you are following a movement that is extreme on one point, or they're extreme in several points, or they're extreme for a particular side. They are opposite extremes, the left and the right. So if you are pro-immigration and you look at the right, you're going to say, well, the right's not pro-immigration. I'm going to go to the left because they're not really racist, supposedly. So you go to the left wing and you're like, yeah, I'm pro-immigration. You know, I'm really glad that you guys are in favor for immigration. And the left wing will look at you and they're going to be like, well, are you pro-life or pro-choice? Well, I'm actually pro-life. Oh, get out of here, you misogynist, sexist, tyrant, fascist, etc., blah, 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 blah. And you're like, well, these people are freaking crazy. Why would you get yourself in a situation like that? Well, it's because if you find yourself in a situation like that, it's because you thought that the other side was good because they agreed with you on this one point. But little did you know that that side that you joined for this one little point was extreme on in one particular way. So if you look at the left wing and you say, well, they're pro-choice and they're pro-abortion, but the right wing, they're pro-life. So then you go to the right wing, but then you find a bunch of crazy stuff over there where they're just like, yeah, you know, illegals, round them all up, throw them out. Yeah, we need a civil war in America, blah, 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 blah. Well, these people are nuts. Well, yeah, because they're extreme in their own way. It's like if you look at ISIS, the Muslim terrorist group. We all heard about this group. And you see them beheading people, cutting people up, whatever. Oh, man, these people are awful. But then you see the Shiites who are backed by Iran, and you're like, wow, these people are really cool because they're fighting ISIS. So then you go to the Shiites, and then before you know it, you see a bunch of Shiite militants cutting a bunch of people up. They're skewering Sunni babies, and they're impaling people because they're Sunni. And you're like, well, these people are freaking monsters. What the hell? I thought you guys were against ISIS. Well, we're only against ISIS because they're Sunni. So why would you find yourself in that situation? It's because the other side is extreme in their own way. So one thing I've noticed over the years is that pretty much everyone, most people are on an extreme side. They're on an extreme side. It's rare that you can find people who can see true things from the left and agree with them there, and true things from the right and agree with them there, and then find that middle way. But looking at the political atmosphere of today, we see a trend towards really populism and extremism, actually. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.